Greetings viewers, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're back on my brother's 2011 Outback 2.5i Limited with the issues with his TR690 CVT. 200,000 miles on the clock, and we have a solenoid issue which will warrant the replacement of the entire valve body because Subaru, as we talked about before, does not sell the solenoids individually. You have to replace the entire valve body when there is a fault. So we're going to be replacing the valve body, we're going to be changing the CVT fluid, and we will be replacing the torque converter because the torque converter clutch has failed. That will not be in this video. That will be in another video at another time because I'm still waiting on one seal coming from Subaru for that replacement. So with that said, let's go ahead and get under the car and get started. Looks like we've got a bit of a rear main seal leak, but we can take care of that when we pull the engine. For the torque converter, we'll go ahead and put a rear main seal and reseal the air oil separator plate. Let's go ahead and remove the fuel plug. There's a 10mm hex back here at the tail housing. I'm just going to break it loose. I don't want to take it all the way out because since the engine is not running, likely the fluid will overflow because you have to have the engine running while checking the level and filling. That's a 10mm hex for the fuel plug and an 8mm hex for the drain. And yes, these are hex plugs. I know they might look like Torx, but these are the Mac Tools RBRT sockets. So that is why they look kind of like a Torx instead of a regular hex. See if we can do this without covering myself in CVT fluid. Not too bad. Look at that CVT fluid, just straight black, looks like old engine oil. That's 200,000 miles of no service, no fluid replacement, no anything. Looks like dirty old engine oil. This stuff comes out of the bottle new, nearly clear, kind of a translucent teal green color, I think. Don't hold me on that because I am red-green colorblind, but I'm pretty sure that's what it looks like. We'll see when I go to fill it. So we're just going to let this drain out. Once it's drained out, we'll go ahead and remove all these little 10mm headed bolts that hold the pan on. We'll break the seal for the pan and drop it and move forward with the removal. Go ahead and start knocking out some of these pan bolts. We're going to use the new Milwaukee Fuel high-speed ratchet. I believe we've got all the pan bolts out now. And yes, indeed we do. So now the trickiest part of it is getting the pan loose without gouging the aluminum case, without bending the pan. Stuck on here pretty good with the RTV silicone. I did find out recently Subaru does make a silicone dissolving spray that helps loosen these up and get them off a little bit easier. But unfortunately for me, I do not have that handy. And I did not pick it up just now when I was at the Subaru dealership picking up the wheel bearing for this car, which we will be replacing the rear wheel bearing because on the test drive, most of you noted I heard a loud noise, and it turned out that was the wheel bearing that was torn up on the rear passenger side. All right, drain plug temporarily tightened back up just to keep hold of it. And now we're gonna go get flat chisel and some razor blades and things, and try to cut the silicone and get this pan down without bending it up. And try this new tool. Not so much new as in new to me. It's supposed to be a oil pan cutter separator by KTC. That's a U1296. So let's try it out on this. I actually bought it after the last one of these jobs I did. Well, that looks like it's done the trick. Let's see if it hurt the pan or the transmission when we get this down, but pretty neat little tool. Hopefully we didn't damage anything with it. Let's get in here and pry this a little bit more. See if we can get this down without making a mess on ourselves. And we did fail that mission. All down my arm, but it happens. We'll let this drain and we'll yank down the rest of the pan. I'd say how much easier it is to do this when you have a lift. CVT fluid does not taste good, guys. You're welcome. I took the bullet for you. You don't have to taste it to find out for yourself. We'll let that continue to drain for a little while, and then we'll come back and drop the strainer and get to removing this valve body. Three 10mm headed bolts, bright silver for our strainer. We can go ahead and drop it down. Ready to catch more fluid. Throw the strainer over there in the pan. And I'll let this sit here for a little while and drain while we clean up the pan and clean up the strainer. Some brake parts cleaner. All right, let's go ahead and disconnect our electrical connector for the valve body. and unbolt the valve body and drop it out of the car. Of course, make another big mess. And we'll let that all drain out, and I'll go clean up since I've got our armpit full of CVT fluid. All right, guys, the old valve body's out. Got to remove this pipe here and replace the O-rings and put it in the new valve body. There are 2 O-rings that are for that pipe, and there's 1 O-ring for the strainer. It's not a filter, it's a strainer. We've gone over this in other videos. There's an O-ring that goes on the strainer there. Pan's all cleaned up, mating surface is clean. Here is our new valve body. So like I said, we need to put the O-rings on that pipe, move the pipe over, then we can bolt this in and bolt the strainer on once we put the new O-ring on it. And then we can get ready to clean everything one final time. High temp Permatex Ultra Gray on the pan, stick it, fasteners back in, let it cure for 24 hours before we refill. All right, guys, stuff is cleaned up, the pan's cleaned up, the pickup's cleaned up. Showed you moving the pipe over from the old valve body to the new O-rings installed on that, new O-ring installed on the pickup. All this has been thoroughly cleaned, all of the mating surfaces. We'll pull that back out of there, that don't need to be in there. So now we are ready to go ahead and put the new valve body up in place and bolt it down and torque it to specification. Go ahead and do a quick swipe. It doesn't really matter at this point for the CVT fluid that has leaked down. It's going to continue to leak until we get the pan on there. Now when you put the valve body up, I mentioned it before on videos, on the previous video on this, is this slot right here. I don't know how well you're going to see this. There is a manual valve, has a retention spring or clip that holds it in place to keep from sliding out of the valve body. But there's a groove in it. You need to line that groove up with this detent. That's the main thing you need to worry about. And make sure you get your pipe in the orifice and get it flushed in there in the O-ring, the seat, before you put in your screws, start tightening them down. Which this will be tricky because I'm on the wrong side for the manual valve. It's not fun working above your head either. Remember, your longer bolt goes in a particular location. Don't get it all mixed up. Don't forget to remove your spring clip that holds the manual valve in place. Very slowly and carefully draw these bolts in. Don't want to torque them. Just snug them up. We got to torque them with the torque wrench. All right, now they're all pretty much evenly snugged down. I'll go ahead and get the torque wrench and torque on the specification. All right, now we can torque our valve body bolts to 9 Newton meters. There is no particular pattern, but it's always good to start in the center and work your way out on this kind of thing. After they're all torqued, go back and double check all of them. All right, all of that is set. Plugged our pigtail back up to the valve body. Now we can put our strainer back up there. Again, we put a new O-ring on the strainer, and we'll torque those 3 bolts that hold it in place to 9 Newton meters as well. A little bit of CVT fluid on the O-ring to lubricate it to help it slide into the orifice. and set. Now all we gotta do is clean our mating surface on the pan and the transmission. Apply a bead of fresh RTV. Make sure that we don't have any drips or runs before we stick the pan on. And then install the 13 10mm headed bolts and torque them to specification. All right, brake parts cleaner on a rag. Degrease this sealing surface at the RTV on the pan flange. Ready to stick it up there. Start tightening these bolts. Tightening torque is 5 Newton meters. All right, all 13 bolts are in. Now we can go through and torque them in a crisscross pattern to 5 Newton meters. All right, now to wait 24 hours and then we can refill.